Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Friday, September 12th, 2025, and on Fridays we talk about human behavior and justifications. I'm a little delinquent in getting the vlog up today because truthfully I was a little bit thrown off by events of the last day or two and I have my concerns, perhaps you as well. I was thinking, what should I focus on today? Because by some indicators, these are indeed fraught times. But in what ways? And what are the sources of our anxiety or stress and so on? And do we have to succumb to the forces of desperation and despair? Well, of course not. We don't have to. We can resist. We can choose to chart a new path forward and create a world in which we thrive and others around us thrive. It's possible. Yes, even in a world that's highly interconnected and over which we're highly dependent upon others for our very survival and well-being. And maybe because of that reality, there are alternative paths forward. But of course, at the same time, it's these larger impersonal forces that create such havoc sometimes in our worldviews, especially if we allow the news and the social media feeds, etc., to wash over us and determine in large measure how we think and feel. Yes, there are discomforting aspects of economic life over which we have relatively little control, like interest rates and gas prices. Yes, there are faith leaders out there who, let's face it, are charlatans, who are intent upon stirring up the world to convince us that some non-believers are all damned for eternity or that they should submit or die. And yes, there are governments out there, including our own, that might sometimes engage in international actions or enact domestic policies from time to time with which we strongly disagree. These are merely three arenas: economics, religion, and politics, where we can easily allow ourselves to become overwhelmed with emotions and perhaps even enraged at what we believe to be the injustices that we feel we're witnessing. And when we allow that to happen, we can and do sometimes engage in irrational thinking and perhaps follow that up with some rather harmful or hurtful actions towards others. So whatever else might be happening then, that's where we have to sort of stop and take a deep breath, slow down, and pause. Refrain from acting impulsively. So what can we do? How should we behave in a world where we sometimes feel like we're overwhelmed or like the forces at play are conspiring against us and our family and our kind or our tribe? Well, of course, there are many possible helpful and healthier thought patterns and actions that we can take. But since the theme this week is flowers, let us consider for a moment the historical importance of one such meta approach to living a meaningful life in accordance with our core values and principles. What am I talking about? Flower power. Yeah, I don't hear that term much these days. I don't know about you, especially in public discourse. In fact, I honestly can't remember the last time I heard someone use the term. Those who might be a little bit younger than myself, and that would be about 80% of you demographically in Canada and the US, you may not be too familiar with the flower power slogan. So the expression was coined by the beat poet Allen Ginsberg in '65 to help shift the conversation about opposition to the US war in Vietnam. So the idea was to transform the widespread protests against the war into more peaceful and affirmative spectacles. The young people, or especially the so-called hippies of the era, would dress in bright colors, with embroidered flowers on their clothing or by wearing flowers in their hair as well, as a means of conveying a message of universal peace. Sure, in time, the concept morphed into a much broader characterization of the hippie movement and the counterculture of drugs and psychedelia and social permissiveness. But the original sentiment was that we could somehow save the world by promoting peace through flower power rather than military power. So here's one symbolic use of flower power to oppose one's government, to protest such idealism. Can flowers actually save us? Well, to some extent, yes, but that requires a very important qualification. What am I talking about? Well, you cannot achieve peace. Let me just be clear. The concept has clearly come out of fashion, right? Especially if you think about in terms of real politics, the overwhelming cynicism and indeed at times hopelessness that dominate our sensibilities these days. And so you cannot achieve peace, it's widely believed, by promoting nonviolence or civil disobedience, or by being passive in the face of the many bad actors, and perhaps even whole governments out there that are aligned against you. But I'd argue that the promotion of flower power is not being passive. It's actually an active form of resistance, or conveying an alternative philosophy and a completely different design for living. And indeed, while it's not a flower, I've used a feather in my case, in my own work, symbolically, to represent something much broader. Okay, and indeed, the next to my own name and my own album, my stage name. That sounds a bit too self-important, but the Dr. J Experience. There's certainly an indigenous meaning behind the symbol that I've incorporated. But it's also, and you're hearing this for the very first time, even my wife hasn't heard this, but it's also indirectly a nod to flower power as well. And what I mean by that simply is that everything that I try to do in my life, the very justification for my existence and whatever remaining time that I might have, involves spreading peace in my thoughts, in my words, and my actions. Now, I can sense that there might be some actual and real objections out there. And by the way, objections to my own philosophy that are entirely valid. My radical approach to peace and harmony does indeed suffer from some clear limitations based on the world in which we currently live, and I acknowledge that. My approach cannot truly work in the world as currently constituted. In fact, I'll take it a step further, argue that the world's far closer today to what Jack Nicholson as Colonel Jessup described in A Few Good Men. I don't have the speech memorized. I've often thought it'd be cool to do that, but here's the extended quote from the film. This is from Colonel Jessup in A Few Good Men. "Son, we live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be guarded by men with guns. Who's going to do it? You? You, Lieutenant Weinberg? I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom. You weep for Santiago and you curse the Marines. You have that luxury. You have the luxury of not knowing what I know, that Santiago's death, while tragic, probably saved lives. And my existence, while grotesque and incomprehensible to you, saves lives. You don't want the truth because deep down in places you don't talk about at parties, you want me on that wall. You need me on that wall. We use words like honor, code, loyalty. We use these words as a backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor the inclination to explain myself to a man who rises and sleeps under the blanket of the very freedom that I provide and then questions the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, I suggest you pick up a weapon and stand your post. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you're entitled to." End quote. And of course, in one sense, he's absolutely right. In other words, we do live in a world with walls, and sometimes literal, as he's describing, or literal as in the Great Wall of China, or literal as in build the wall on the southern border. But mostly metaphorical. We live in a world of nation states with geopolitical borders. And that's, of course, too, what Nicholson's talking about. And when we build walls or moats or establish property lines or whatever between us and them, then yes, we need guns. It demands violence should anyone dare to encroach upon our land or territory or that which we believe belongs to us. And so in the political sphere, there are even those who further believe that within the existing walls, they're justified then in using violence to silence those with whom they disagree, because they've breached somehow the ideological walls that we construct to justify what we believe. And so the use of violence reflects then our own limitations as human beings. That is, our inability then to use words and reason and better ideas to counter those with whom we disagree. And the use of political violence is the ultimate sign in that sense of weakness and capitulation. I cannot get you to see the world the way that I do, so I'm going to kill you. And of course, that extends much further. I cannot get you to look like me or believe like me, so I will kill you. I cannot allow you in my space or in my territory or in my world. And so I must kill you. I must eliminate you. I have to at least send you back somehow. The logical conclusion is that one very, very few people could even imagine entertaining these days. The only way that flower power could ever succeed, truly succeed in the long run, would require the elimination of walls and barriers, literal and ideological, all those that keep us divided. So, in my view, the naivete of the flower power movement was in the notion that you could somehow convince people who run governments or who cling to economic and political power that they'll simply trade in their guns and their money and their wealth for flowers. That's absurd. They belong to those systems of which they're a product, as do we to varying degrees. And so when you say proudly, well, I'm a Canadian, I'm an American, and I will defend this country no matter what, to the death, I get it. That makes perfect sense within the existing geopolitical order. One just has to understand and appreciate then that you're setting hard limits to establishing peace or moving beyond violence. In fact, you cannot actually do that. You cannot live a life of nonviolence in a world with walls and barriers between each other. And I'm a realist, so I don't get depressed. I don't feel hopeless. I understand the slow evolution of the human condition and that sometimes we take a few steps back. And I understand that as long as I'm alive in my lifetime, in whatever short time I have left, we're going to continue to live in a world with walls and barriers and property lines. Again, very few people could even imagine a world without these things. So I just do my best as a person, just like you, to lead a life by example. That is, I try to live as though the walls and barriers do not exist. Everyone that I meet, including those with whom I might completely disagree, and certainly those with whom I don't share a common language or ethnic background or common culture, I try to honor them in every meeting. I try to honor every person as such. In other words, it doesn't matter who you are. There's a dignity to which you're entitled, at least in my view. Okay? I may disagree with you, and at the end of the day, we may not be able to get along, especially if you're intent upon, or if I were intent upon, harming you. And that's going to create a problem, nation state or no nation state. But the point is it's even deeper than that, because for whatever reason, after 13.8 billion years of an evolving universe, and after 100,000 years or even more of human evolution, somehow each of us emerged from this messy, complex cauldron of organic materials to become sentient, living, breathing human beings. And here we are. So what are our choices? And again, when I think about it in these broader terms, what are the chances that we should have ever met in the first place? They're virtually incalculable. So I try to honor every chance in every meeting that I have with each person. The odds of our meeting in the first place were just overwhelming, almost a miracle. And when I meet you and you meet me, I just hope we'll do our best to love and honor and support each other. That's what I try to do, try as best I can, in every sphere of my life, every day of my life. Okay? And so here's what a dear friend of mine, whom I've never met, shared with me just yesterday. So this is from Sharon Sinclair. And that's her photo. And she says, at first I saw the heron, and then I noticed how the tree branches form crosses. Nature's reminder to forgive and go forward in peace, he writes. And she sent me not only the photo, but she shared with me as well one of her original poems. It's given me permission to share it publicly with you as well. And it's called Carpe Diem. I'll leave a link below to Sharon's own YouTube channel. But she writes in this poem, outside my window, a new day dawns, radiant with promise, a flower in full bloom. Let me savor the fragrance of each moment, keenly aware that time's fleeting beauty rests in my hands. Let me share my spirit garden with each soul I touch today. Let others find in me petals of joy scattered with abandon. Let me plant seeds of hope in unlikely places before the sun sets tonight, my grateful heart. I love that poem. It's quickly become one of my favorites of all time. So thank you, Sharon. And thank you for listening out there, whoever you are, wherever you may be. And may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs and flowers in abundance. And I hope to see you soon.